Good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. We did have a few dozen signed up, and we've had a good turnout the last two sessions that we've had, so we may still have people trickling in. My name is Jill Jibbett, and I'm the Manager of Research Development Support in the Med School Office of Research. And I am charged with developing and improving resources to help faculty get their research funding. And this communication series is something that we developed in order to get faculty important information about how to convey to audiences the importance and the significance of the work that we do here, to convey our impact. And with two goals in mind, one of them to increase success rates of getting research funding, right? If there's sort of name recognition by the time that faculty proposals get to review boards and to study sections, then that's all the better. And also just to keep audiences, to make them aware of our impact, right? Because taxpayers are often the ones that elect people that decide whether NIH gets their budgets. So this is the third installment of our communication series, and we're talking about scholarly communication and dissemination today. And we have two more installments in this series, plain language workshops coming up next week, or 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then a data visualization workshop in December. And everything is being recorded, so you can find that online. Please sign in if you didn't get a chance to sign in, and help yourself to refreshments. I would like to introduce Jean Song from the U of M Library, and Molly Kleinman from Health Information Technology Services. I'll hand it over to them.
Great, thank you. Good morning. My name is Jean Song. As Jill has said, I am the interim assistant director for the Academic and Clinical Engagement Unit of the Taubman Health Sciences Library, the library portion of the Taubman Health Sciences Library. And this is Molly Kleinman. She is from Learning Design and Publishing in HITS and the medical school. And today I'm going to talk to you about scholarly communications. I do actually have a bit.ly link for these slides that will come in at the end. You can choose to write that down, or it'll be in the recording. But if you need it for some reason, you're a burning desire to see it right away, the bit.ly link will come at the end for you. So what is scholarly communications? And in many senses, it is whatever you want it to be, or whatever whoever is talking about it is. But in general, it's the dissemination of scholarly work. And you'll have to excuse me as I move back and forth to toggle between windows. But in practice, we like to talk about it in terms of the life cycle of scholarly work, from creation to dissemination to preservation. So for today, however, I am going to talk about scholarly communications in the issues that are presented to us most regularly, especially in the library. And that includes data management, public and open access, publishing, and basically measuring impact. So I will cover those areas. This is like really informal, so if you would like to ask me questions as we go along, I'm happy to try to answer them for you, and Molly will pipe in as we move along. So in terms of data management, we also like to think of data management in terms of data lifecycle, from creation all the way to publishing and preservation. So when we talk about creation, we are often driven by our funder mandates, especially in terms of their requirements for data management planning. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that. I also want to talk to you about what options you have in terms of sharing your data and preserving your data, and briefly touch on clinical trials data, since that is a special cohort of data that we need to address, particularly in the health sciences. So in an ideal world, before we collect data or create data, we would think about how we plan to share, reuse, and preserve it. Of course, that doesn't really happen, but this is kind of what the funder agencies are hoping that we will do in terms of data management planning. And the library has traditionally had a lot of experience in metadata, right, where we're describing data in order for best discovery. Unfortunately, metadata is limited in the description of data itself, and so really we encourage you to think about how it is you plan on sharing this information and saving this information and preserving it before you actually start creating it and collecting it. There are a whole bunch of federal data sharing mandates. I'm going to show that to you, and all of them require data management plans. They vary from agency to agency. General common elements include a description of the type of data or types of data you're planning on collecting, the metadata standards you are planning on using, how you will protect sensitive data, and what policies you will be implementing, and how you will preserve this data. Those are general elements that all these data management plans have in common. So I'm going to show you what these mandates are, and the next slide actually has a nice summary in one place where you can actually use that for your own reference in the future. So I'm a little less Mac savvy. So I typically like to use the University of Minnesota Funding Agency guidelines, mainly because they put everything in a tabular form. They have link outs to the specific agency requirements. All of them require data management plans, so this column is in many ways superfluous, and it kind of gives you a brief summary as to where to store your data. And if you go scroll further down, you'll actually see additional documentation on what these plans state and require. There's actually a lot of help available for you to create these data management plans, which are now really every agency is requiring them for submission, upon submission of your grant application. ICPSR has a really great data management and curation webpage that is dedicated to data management plans, as well as the University Library System has a data management plan guide specific to the NSF, or the National Science Foundation requirements, because they were the first agency to require this, so their requirements have been pretty stringent and in place for a while. So let me go to, this is ICPSR's DMP area, and you can see there are resources for development. There are templates and tools that are available to you, as well as some additional guidance. Our own University of Michigan data management plan website is listed here, and good practice guidance. But more importantly, there are some natural science examples here that can be applicable to your own grant writing purposes. We have recently launched a new service where we will help you with your data management plans. You can reach us at help@umich.edu. That is a triage service. We'll help you to think about places where you need to preserve your data or share your data, go through the individual guidance with you depending on the agency. So feel free to contact us there. Here's that summary slide that shows you all the data management sort of requirements from the funding agencies. You'll see all the major agencies participate. They all require a data management plan for their funding proposals, and they all have these repositories, which, if you look at the descriptions, are quite intentionally vague, which is really unfortunate. So let's talk about where you can share data. The first question that we ask is why, because this can be a huge burden for our investigators, and we understand that. But there are really good reasons, right? It's to encourage open scientific inquiry. It's to encourage reuse and drive research with data that we already know we have collected. And as you are very well aware, NIH has a huge push for rigor and reproducibility, and data sharing is one of those elements that can help to contribute to reproducibility. And there are many studies demonstrating that we have not the capacity to do that in the way that we share our data now. And so there are really, really good reasons to do this, even though it can be a real pain in the butt to actually do it. So the bigger question, though, is where. And as I said before, the agency guidelines are varied and vague. There is a great tool coming out of Spark, which is an organization that actually promotes open access. And they have a data sharing tool that allows you to actually look at the guidance of specific agencies simply by clicking on them and then comparing multiple agencies at once. So by pulling together CDC and NIH, they break down the data management aspects of the funding agency mandates into broad sections, and they look at how those agencies are currently approaching the aspect of that portion of the data management or data sharing policy, and what it plans on doing looking forward. So this is CDC and NIH side to side. You'll see exclusions and limitations, when the data are to be shared, how the data are to be shared, metadata and documentation, citation and attribution, and so on. And they also talk about the data management planning. So this will help you to think about the life cycle of the data, particularly depending on where you're getting your funding to conduct the research that it is that you are doing. There are some additional repositories, though. Since many of us are getting NIH funding, it's important to know that the NIH has had a lot of data sharing repositories. If any of you are dealing with protein or gene data, you're well aware of sort of our genome responsibilities with NIH, and so they do make repositories available. They do provide a data sharing repository page that is broken up by the individual centers and a description. And I find that really useful because it's hard to find sources that demonstrate where you can actually share your data. So here it's listed by the institute and the repository name. You will see a description and the data submission policy link and how to access the data. This may, in fact, fulfill your agency requirements for data sharing, but it will depend on the center or the institute. This is why you probably want the slides, because there are lots of links in there. Oop. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. Finally, there's also r3data.org. This is a registry of research data repositories. That's why it's R3. And this is the largest registry of data repositories that are out there. You can search and perhaps find a repository that will accept your data, or if you're interested in finding other data, you may want to go here to explore it even further. Finally, the University of Michigan Library System has long had an institutional repository. It is called Deep Blue, and you have probably heard about it before. It is a place historically where we have stored our publications for individuals and the scholarly works coming out of our institution. Recently, they launched Deep Blue Data, which is a data portion of our institutional repository that can also help you to store and preserve your data. There are limitations, though, and you will need to talk to somebody in the Research Data Services Division about that. But upfront, I want to let you know that we cannot store sensitive information in this repository. So the next most common question we get is, how long? How long am I supposed to store this data? And there is an SPG, actually, out of the university that talks about institutional data resource management. It talks about some broad basis of our institutional data and our requirements, what we want to do to safeguard, but it actually doesn't specifically talk about retention. IRB Med does provide some record-keeping guidelines, and they also have a chart to talk about different types of records. In general, the recommendation is 10 years. In general, for the data portion of our Deep Blue institutional repository, we tell you that we will store it for 10 years. So that seems to be a general ballpark in terms of time. But again, the single most important guidance you will receive on this will be whatever your funding mandate is, your funding body mandate is. So that could vary depending on whether or not you're getting funding from the Gates Foundation or from NIH or the specific directorate within NIH. So in terms of clinical trials, you all are very well aware of the recent Federal Register requirement talking about, as I have advanced forward, about our clinical trials data and unapproved FDA registration clinical trials data. There is a big push for sharing more clinical trials data. This comes not only from the public, but the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors recently put out a proposal, a comment in the Annals of Internal Medicine describing their intent and their desire for all publications with clinical trials data, even though you were required to register, to share that data within 1 year of publication. That was open to comment, and you can see that ICMJE encompasses our flagship journals in this area. Is also supported by the National Library of Medicine and the World Association of Editors, and basically sharing of all clinical trials data for publication submitted to these journals. Now, there are some journals that already do have this requirement in place, but I believe you will begin to see this more and more as the public and patients would like to see this data, as other researchers would like to see this data. The library, the Medical Library Association, we proposed comments to this proposal as well. The comment period is now over, but I imagine we will see some guidance from ICJME fairly soon, actually. So you do have a lot of options, though, in terms of getting help at our institution. So the Data Office for Clinical and Translational Research can help you not only access sensitive information, but they provide data consultation services to talk about sensitive data analysis, and storage options for sensitive data. So you could certainly contact them. I believe I have their they have some self-service tools to help you to access sensitive information. I'm assuming most of you are here are creating your own data, but this is a way that you could get additional data consultation help. But above all else, sort of in the data management and the data lifecycle thing, the thing that I want to harp on is that it's really, really important that you are reading your funding body requirements. They will drive how it is that you need to frame your proposal and actually collect and reuse and share and preserve your data. So it is really, really important. Most of them, if not all, will be very specific in this arena going forward. So I kind of want to move into sort of sharing in general. Public and open access are terms that have been bandied about, and if you aren't familiar already, you may probably be most familiar with the NIH public access policy. This was put into place in 2008, and it is basically part of the government's push towards transparency, right? And to make information that is funded by taxpayers available to taxpayers themselves. There have been a whole bunch of legislative actions to continue to support this public access sort of policy, and those data sharing and data management plans aspects of funding agencies' plans are part of this. It was requested from the Office of Science and Technology policy memo in February 2013. The agencies actually responded to that memo in March 2015 was the last one, and the last of them went into effect in January of this year. So any agency that's really doling out money at all for your research needs falls under this memo requirement and has both the publications and a data public access requirement for you to share. If we look at NIPAP, which I'm going to call it from now on, the National Institutes of Health Public Access Policy, it's for all peer-reviewed manuscripts after April 2008, resulting from NIH direct funding. NIH has actually been doing this for a long time, and it has put into place additional measures to encourage people to follow this guidance. And so actually in July of 2013, they released another notice that that in essence really required people to come into compliance with the public access policy, which meant that you would deposit your peer-reviewed manuscript into PubMed Central, make it available for the public to read. And if you did not, and it did not receive the PubMed Central ID number, it started to withhold your grant renewal funding. Okay? And so I want to bring this home because this law is now 8 years old and over 8 years old. Many of your grant administrators are very well aware of this and helping you to comply. I know for a fact that U of M has had funding delayed, and any range of money from small to millions of dollars for a single publication. So it is a real thing, and it can have a real impact on the work that it is that you do. So if you're not aware of what your requirements are here, if you have a cited grant and you are a PI, regardless of whether or not it's a training grant or a center grant, that publication must be deposited into PubMed Central if you are citing an NIH grant. Right? That can be somebody from a different institution citing your center. And I know that that's difficult to track, but in the end, NIH doesn't care about the individual making the deposits of these publications. NIH cares that the University of Michigan is making the deposits. So if you are a PI, especially on these collaborative grants, right, you must be very well aware of this because it will come on your progress report that you have publications out of compliance, even if the author is someone sitting in China who is citing your grant. And it is your obligation to make sure that that has a PMC ID. It is not the author's obligation. We are held institutionally responsible. It is not the author that will be held responsible because what NIH has are blunt instruments, right? So it can institutionally say that, you know, we will not be supporting, you know, the renewal of this funding or whatever going forward. So they have done this, and this is what the statistics show us. So before 2008, you could actually put your publications to PubMed Central voluntarily. But after the law, it became mandatory and we see a spike. And then they began to monitor sometime in 2009, right, and began to spike. But in 2013, when they began to withhold funds, that's when we see our most dramatic increase. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because you will see that the publications repositories available to us by the agency requirements off of our federal agencies, many of them are using PubMed Central as their deposit solution. What that means is these other agencies have a mechanism by which they can monitor whether or not people are complying with their funding mandate. So I just want to give you the heads up, because even though NIH is the only one that's actually enforcing their policy, we could easily foresee that the other agencies can easily put in a similar type of compliance measure. And the library, we've been doing this a long time. So kind of like the seatbelt law, like where we feel like at the beginning, it was like, hey, everyone, please use your seatbelts, right? And then it was like, hey, everyone, if we pull you over and you're not wearing your seatbelt, we'll cite you. Hey, everyone, if you're not wearing your seatbelt, we'll pull you over. It's kind of like that. And so we understand that there's a lot of confusion because you can have an article with like 15 authors. It really doesn't matter who deposits it. If you are a PI and your grant number is on there, make sure you get into PubMed Central so that none of your funding is delayed. Certainly there's no requirement at the get-go for your funding applications, but we could also see that NIH might put something in place for that as well. So public access and open access are terms that often get very confusing for people. And so I want to clarify what that is right now, especially because we have a lot of open access journals, and I want you to know what that means. Open access allows us to remove the financial barriers to using and accessing information. And it is the free and immediate online availability of articles, also coupled with the right to reuse it, right? So that you can, machine readable, text mining, all of those things. Even though PubMed Central is readable and anyone in the world could see those full text articles, right? You do not necessarily have the right to text mine those articles because they are copyright protected. What makes them public access is that they are read, and it may not be immediate. So journals are allowed to embargo content for up to a year under the NIH public access policy. Open access makes it available immediately and allows you to reuse it. So those are the differences. There are some myths about open access. One, it's not an indicator of quality, either poor or good. I think it gets a misnomer of being poor. It's usually the peer review process that is poor and not the model itself. It doesn't guarantee that you'll get more readers or greater impact. There was actually a recent study by one of our colleagues in the library in PLOS One that actually did demonstrate that those articles that became open did get more readership. But in general, basically the gist of it is if you have a crappy article, it's still going to be crappy whether or not it's open. If you have a good article and it's open, there's a chance that more people will read it. It's not free. Like, we think all of our information is free, which is why we have very few print newspapers still remaining, but it is also not free. And it's not cheap. That's another thing. So there's a database called Sherpa Romeo, which allows you to search journals and their copyright agreements, and it actually talks about whether or not these journals are public or open access. And it's a source that we use in the library extensively, especially when people are like, I don't know what my copyright transfer agreement was for this journal and whether or not I have to deposit. So many journals actually will now deposit into PubMed Central for you as long as you've indicated on your copyright transfer agreement that you received NIH funding, and that is a blessing for y'all, because it can be really painful to track that. But our biggest recommendation is to read your copyright transfer agreement. I'm going to talk about copyright in just a second. It's not only for the protection of your own copyright and retaining those rights that really should belong to you, but also to know sort of what the nuances are. So if you do indicate that you have NIH funding, many of these journals will now deposit on your behalf. But if you know or you don't know, or your grant administrator knows or doesn't know, or your administrative assistant knows or doesn't know, this is a good database to go and double check. Does this journal deposit for me, or am I going to have to do it on my own? Okay. So in terms of publication sharing, here's a quick summary of where you can deposit publications from these funding agencies that have a requirement. The last one to go was, I think, NSF and USDA. So as of January 16th, basically every major agency is requiring you to share your publications. You will see, as I mentioned before, that PubMed Central is a repository of choice. So remember that PubMed Central is not PubMed. So in PubMed, we have maybe close to 30 million abstracts. And then PubMed Central, I think we're at 4 or 5 million full text articles. So if you have funding from multiple agencies, for instance, if you have funding from the Department of Education and NIH together, and you produce an article where you're citing both of those agencies, then you will have a dual deposit requirement where you will have to put your article into PubMed Central and in the Department of Education's repository, which is ERIC. So the library is investigating whether or not we can have Deep Blue be a central repository where then we will push it out to all of these other repositories on your behalf. But a lot of these agencies are not prepared to allow sort of these third-party deposits. So PubMed Central is, and we can certainly deposit to PubMed Central if you put it into Deep Blue, but you don't gain any benefit yet. So we're working particularly with NSF, because that's another huge funder on our campus, and ERIC. And this table also comes from the University of Minnesota guides. That's why I kind of like it. It's the other UM. Okay, So there are other opens, and you'll hear these terms used as well. So open education, and Molly can speak to this, is the ability to use and customize and reuse educational resources. And Open Michigan has recently launched its new web look and is a resource available to you for your educational purposes. And Molly can speak to you more about that at the end, especially if you have any questions there. I'm sure you've heard of open source software. If you are a developer or work with developers, this is the ability to take code and reuse it and remake it into your image or however it is that you want to develop it. Very popular because sharing of code is very popular and is a model in sort of development that is highly accepted. And then open data is the sharing of data and being able to reuse it. So let's talk about publishing for a little bit. I mentioned this before. So you have copyright protections for the things that it is that you produced, right? And I want to make very clear, so the university has an author's addendum that will help you to retain some of the rights that you have for your publications. That's available at the Copyright Office website. We do have one at the university, within the university library. It is actually staffed to also take questions about copyright, but Molly is also able to answer your copyright questions in learning, design, and publishing. So you're welcome. They work very well together, so they'll pass questions back and forth. There's an SPG on faculty copyright. I just want to say that we encourage you to retain your rights. It's very easy for you to sign the copyright transfer agreement because you're so excited that your manuscript has passed the peer review process, but it's much easier to negotiate your rights up front than after the fact, if at all after the fact. And as our director of our repository said, he has never had an experience where a publisher was like, done, we're not publishing your work, right? So it's really a negotiation process, and it's your work, it's your effort, and it's your peers that are doing the peer review process. So please protect your rights as much as you are able. We also have several publishing services on campus. Michigan Publishing is based within the university library system. It houses the University of Michigan Press, because we actually still have one, and Deep Blue, our institutional repository. Then Learning, Design, and Publishing within HITS and the medical school also can help you with book and journal publishing, and they've recently launched a couple of new journals, open access actually. They can help you with instructional content development, and they can guide you through Open Michigan, your open educational one-stop shopping, as it were. So you can talk to them. And as I said, Molly can also guide you on copyright issues. So it's sort of this final portion of the workshop. I want to talk about measuring impact. And I guess, we can ask questions at the end, but if you have burning questions, a lot of people talk about how they can measure their impact or their work's impact. And so I thought it would behoove us to talk a little bit about some of the standard measures that we have in this area. The first thing that we do recommend, though, is using something like ORCID. ORCID is the Open Researcher, and I forget what the C is, identifier, and it is like a social security number for you and your research works to help disambiguate you from other researchers. It is linked to many other systems, including mCommunity, if you weren't already aware of that. I can show you my profile. It is free to sign up, and it distinguishes you. So my last name is Song, which is like the 5th most popular surname in Korea, but like probably way more people in China actually also have that last name. And so they're like my mother-in-law actually, and I have the same name. So the chances of me disambiguate, and in fact, I actually had a woman contact me out of the blue who wanted to know she could buy my Twitter handle from me because her name was also Jean Song and she wanted to use it to begin her marketing career, which I said, no, sorry. But like the point being that there are plenty of ways that you will have the same name as somebody else. And this is one way to distinguish yourself by signing up for an ORCID ID. And here we go. Sorry, I gotta find it. Oop. It's free, and we'll link it to your M Community directory. The next page, I'll show you actually what it looks like in M Community and in PubMed. And so we recommend highly that you sign up for this, especially in PubMed. It did not disambiguate authors until recently using these ORCID IDs. And so if you had a very common name, even if you do an author search now, it's very, very difficult for you to disambiguate. You can hope to maybe do some searching that might put in like geographic location, but it is super, super difficult. And I've also had female colleagues who changed their names, and again, very difficult to link those searches together. There are some other databases like Scopus that do the author disambiguation for you, so they've assigned you internally one of their IDs, but PubMed is not one of those. Okay. Yes?
Does it identify across various institutions you might be in?
Yes. So this, it's like your social security number, so it stays with you wherever you go. So if you change your institutional affiliation or whatever, you just port it with you. It's really meant to be a unique identifier that's for you and you alone, regardless of your institution, however many places you move. And that's another issue in PubMed. So when we do author searches at the library and people want comprehensive searches on faculty members, if they have moved around a lot, it is a very, very difficult search to do if they have a common name. So there are other metrics, and these are all very citation level metrics. So you're all very well aware of the impact factor that most journals tout as being important. We have a database that Thomson provides to us called Journal Citation Reports that actually summarizes all of the impact factors for journals in different disciplines. So you can search it directly rather than relying on what their promotional website might be telling you, because it might have been the highest impact factor they had received in its history or whatever. So, so you can go directly to the source. Another thing is the author level metrics. So a while ago, the H-index was developed, and the H-index is basically a summary marker for your top cited publications and the number of publications, and sort of like this the center point. And it was meant to kind of get at your impact through your citations. There are, of course, many caveats with the H-index. It can be overinflated due to citation bias. It can be underinflated, especially if you are a younger or junior faculty member, because you just don't have the time yet to get the citation numbers that make it a meaningful number. It is, however, very, very popular amongst administrators, and we get questions a lot. In the beginning, it was about promotion and tenure, and we do a whole spiel about H-index, but it does exist and people do use it, and now they have embedded it into a lot of the resources, the databases that we use to search literature. So in Google Scholar, you can look at your own H-index by creating your own profile in Google Scholar and submitting your publications to it. Scopus, if you haven't been using that as a literature database, is the largest bibliographic database in the world. It has over 54 million citations. It includes much of the PubMed corpus, but then it includes an entire body of work in the engineering field. They also, if you do an author search, will display the H-index of the authors. Web of Science, which used to be the old cited by, and one of the few ways that you could see who had cited you, also produces an H-index under their citation report function. At the citation level, which you're all very well aware of now, is how many times has this article been cited. Google Scholar, Scopus, and Web of Science do this, as well as PubMed. Now, Google Scholar will always be overinflated because they basically scour the world, right? PubMed, there are actually people who decide what journals they will index in there, which is about 6,000. And Scopus and Web of Science are the same way. So all of these tools will show you what article has cited your article, but only within the world that it is that they know. So PubMed will show you, hey, this article has been cited 34 times. by other journals in PubMed. So this is what my M community profile looks like, and you'll see that my ORCID ID appears here in the profile. In PubMed, because I didn't have my ORCID ID for my publication, I pulled up a different publication. You will see under the Medline view, there's an author ID, and it will actually disambiguate for the ORCID ID. This is a newer function, but I highly recommend it. The university did push out ORCID IDs to much of the campus, but in the health sciences we did not. So you must register yourself. It's free, but you must go and do it yourself. So another sort of trendy thing to measure impact is alternative metrics. And so the idea behind alternative metrics is that we are using a very old publication and publishing and dissemination system that originates way long ago when we did measure sort of weight and impact in traditional publication media. And because so many people, as you have been learning in your social media and your media workshops, there are so many other mechanisms by which we demonstrate impact, whether it's through non-traditional publication or opinion pieces, whether it is through Twitter, whether it is through other sort of social media venues, that it is not necessarily an accurate measure to look strictly at the citation-based metrics to measure impact. So alternative metrics is an idea about studying sort of the impact of scholarship using a broader sort of landscape of measures. So Altmetrics is a site that provides some of this. It will look at like Twitter and Mendeley and Zotero, all these sort of webcasting sites, like where there are social components, and you get kind of higher impact, right, by the number of people who are either following you or have accessed your things because this body of work is available publicly for anyone to see. Impact Story is another place where you can do this. I'm going to show you my profile there. So this is my overview. That is my Twitter handle that somebody tried to buy off of me. Talks about your achievements and other things. I don't have a good social media, but like if I were to show you my colleague, Patricia Anderson, if you've ever worked with her, she's the one that live tweets everything all the time. Like she'd be like exploded off of these pages. But it's another way of looking at your impact that embraces other media than the traditional peer-reviewed manuscript. Which also, by the way, all the citation counts do not also accurately reflect any of your traditional publications that happen outside of the journal literature. So if you're publishing and editing books and book chapters, those citation metrics don't really capture that either. So it is a hope that these types of alternative metrics will give you a fuller picture of somebody's impact, especially as people begin to migrate into these other environments more fully. So finally, before I let y'all ask questions and let you go, one of the biggest areas that we get questions on and get asked for help in is avoiding sort of predatory journal practices. More importantly, we actually get involved after it's almost like it's too late, right? So we'll get a lot of people who come to us and say, you know, these people, they put me on their editorial board and they're crappy, and how do I get my name off? So the answer is, it's kind of like too late. It's really, really difficult. You can't make them remove your name. You can't enforce any policy. They have an address that comes from an underdeveloped country somewhere. It's really, really awful. And so I want to leave you with some generally good guidelines on avoiding predatory practices, because there are bad apples out there, and we want to avoid them. So I'm going to pull up my notes just so I don't forget anything. So first of all, be wary of unsolicited calls for proposals, because we get a lot of those, right? But good journals, they just don't do that, right? However, I think we have to be very cognizant of the fact that it is very possible that there are really good potential journals out there, right? Journals that do address an area that hasn't been well addressed before, right? Things like the Journal of Negative Research, right, or Negative Results, right? That was a journal that was created because we're not publishing negative results, and so there's an inherent publication bias. And so there are very well-intended journals that are trying to get off their feet, and they will make the cold call. But in general, if you're getting the cold call, you should be wary. Do not agree to submit or review submissions or join an editorial board of a journal that you don't know, right? I think that especially junior faculty are very keen on increasing their presence and contributing to the scientific community and being part of that peer review process. But if you do not know the journal and you cannot ask people and those people cannot respond, then this is not a journal for you. You need to do your due diligence up front. You should not accept any sort of editorial requests without having vetted it prior. Fact check any claims. So if they can't talk to you about their business model or their fees or their peer review process or who's on their editorial board, or if they tell you there are people on their editorial board and you can't verify with those people, then you're in trouble, right? And you know that it's a bad apple. So do all of those things. Do your due diligence and make sure that these are real people that they're saying is on the editorial board, or that this is their real business model if you're planning on joining the editorial board. Make sure your own professional presence is accurate, because you're going to need that in order to verify other people's requests, right? So practice what it is that you preach. Make it easy for people to know what your institution is, what your publication history is. Make that public presence very visible, because it'll be a lot harder for a disreputable journal to say that you're on their editorial board if your information cannot verify it. Practice herd immunity, right? Like, talk to your colleagues. Your colleagues are your best resources in this area, right? And if you don't know, I've had a request recently about a new journal from a faculty member. And, we have subject experts. Our job as informationists is actually to figure out where we want to spend our money in terms of which journals it is that we want to collect for you. So we've actually spent some time doing this. So ask your librarian, right? If you're worried about authenticity or of a journal or a conference, because apparently this happens with conferences as well, ask us. We are happy to tap into our peer network and look into it for you. We also have additional tools to check the validity and the credentials of journals, and we'll tell you what our gut reaction is. So we're a good resource. And basically, know your own field, right? Know where people are publishing in your field, right? Know that area really well, because you will be your own best judge of whether or not something seems shady. And again, you can confer with us. We're happy to do some additional research for you. All right. So I have some people, Molly, I have to thank, who can also answer your questions about Open Michigan. So we're happy to do that. And Meredith Kahn, actually, who published that open access article on predatory publishing. So I'm happy to take your questions now if you have any, or any other burning questions related to scholarly communications. I don't know, Molly, if you want to speak briefly about Open Michigan.
Actually, can you just pull it up real quick? Just open.umichigan. Hopefully it'll be there. It should be there. So I don't know how familiar any of you are with Open Michigan, but for the last several years, it has been an initiative based in the medical school but serving the entire campus that took all kinds of different course materials, but also other kinds of learning resources, training modules, cleared them of copyright issues, and then shared them for free online so that anyone could both use and access them, but also adapt and build on them. We have now relaunched with a new website in partnership with the university library, and we've sort of broadened our scope a little bit. So our goal now is to be a gateway to all the different kinds of open content that we have here on campus. So not just open educational resources, but also our various open data resources, our open publications resources, like the kinds of things that Jean was talking about. We are also still producing open educational resources and doing the same process of clearing copyright and sharing them for free online. So if any of you teach or have other kinds of educational resources that you'd like to share more broadly, I would love to work with you to get those published on Open Michigan. If you are looking for resources that you can use in your classroom or that you can use in contexts that might not be protected the way that classroom use is, so under copyright law, you're very free to do pretty much anything with copyrighted material in your classroom. Not anything, but almost anything. But once you start sharing things online or presenting things at national conferences, you may be more limited in what you can do with copyrighted material. And so one thing that we can do at Open Michigan is to help you find resources that you are free to use the way you need them. So Jean's presentation is mostly focused on openness and access to the work that you create, but we also can help you get at all of the open stuff that everyone else has created. And we're at open.umich.edu, and I think that is probably, that covers the important bits.
Is there any questions that I could help answer for you? Great. Well, then thank you very much for having us this morning, and have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.